However, back to the here and now, and we do still have some blustery winds, particularly towards northern parts as we go through the night, and there'll also be some showery outbreaks of rain pushing southeastwards across some parts of the UK, though many areas staying largely dry, some clear skies as well, and under these clear skies temperatures will take a bit of a dip, mid-single figures towards the south, a little bit colder than this further north, some places dipping below freezing, so there could be a patchy frost, even some icy patches to watch out for first thing Tuesday morning. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow morning then, a wet start across parts of the southwest, some heavy outbreaks of rain here. That rain then feeds its way northeastwards across much of England, Wales and into Northern Ireland and just into the far south of Scotland through the afternoon too. Staying drier across the north, brighter too, but chillier, temperatures in mid-single figures, milder towards the southwest of the UK. As we go towards Wednesday, it's another unsettled picture for much of the UK. Many areas will be cloudy, outbreaks of rain, which could be a little bit heavy at times. Always the best chance of seeing some bright sunny weather will be across northern parts of Scotland, but holding on to that chilly feel there. Otherwise, and more wet weather to come as we go through Thursday, could be some disruptive rain around. Friday's looking drier. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good evening. A diversity push is damaging standards in the United Kingdom's armed forces. Can anything be done to arrest it? Murderers and drug dealers, you couldn't really make this up, could you, are now using Christian conversions to stay in the United Kingdom. And in Dover on Friday night, a farmers' protest, but it is perhaps a symptom of what is happening in rural England. Tories like Jacob Rees-Mogg could be at risk of losing their seats. And we will go live to the northeast. Of course, it'll be the People's Forum with Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, live after this show at 8 o'clock. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom today is that the Prime Minister has been busy defending his government's action on the economy, insisting it is now turning a corner. During a visit to Yorkshire today, he acknowledged it had been a difficult few years for households. Data published later this week will show whether or not the UK has slipped into a recession. The Prime Minister insists, though, all the indicators are heading in the right direction.
The last couple of years have been undoubtedly difficult for the country and the economy, recovering from COVID, the war in Ukraine, the impact on energy bills. But at the start of this year, I really believe that the economy has turned a corner and we're heading in the right direction. You can see inflation has come down from 11% to 4%. Mortgage rates are starting to come down. Wages have been rising consistently now. Because of the economic circumstances are improving, we've been able to cut taxes.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's Safety of Rwanda bill has been the subject of much debate today in the House of Lords, where it faced considerable opposition. A joint committee of MPs and peers says the law is fundamentally incompatible with the UK's human rights obligations. The House of Lords will be voting on a series of amendments designed to weaken Rishi Sunak's legislation to deport asylum seekers to the East African nation. 2 suspected migrants have been caught entering the country illegally by hiding in the luggage compartment of a school coach. Police were called when the men, thought to be in their 20s, were found in the lowest suitcase hold on their way to Southampton from France, where the school children had been on a school trip. It's understood one of the men tried to run away but was stopped by parents waiting to pick up their children. The Home Office has refused to clarify where the 2 men have been detained, but said the government works closely with law enforcement agencies to tackle illegal migration in all its forms. Nottinghamshire Police is being investigated over the force's contact with paranoid schizophrenic Valdo Calacane before he went on to kill 3 people. The Independent Office for Police Conduct has launched a probe into police's contact with Calacane, as well as their handling of the murder investigation itself. The 32-year-old killed 2 students and a caretaker last year in Nottingham in unprovoked attacks. The watchdog added allegations have also been made about the non-execution of an outstanding warrant for his arrest prior to the killings. Plans to block bonuses for water-polluting company bosses don't go far enough, says Labour, and they're calling for tougher measures. Senior executives from 5 of the 11 firms were given more than £26 million in total of bonuses over the last 4 years, even when there were sewage spills. The regulator, Ofwat, will launch a consultation on the proposed ban later this year. And the Royal Navy aircraft carrier HMS Prince of Wales has left Portsmouth Harbour following a slight delay at the weekend. The £3 billion warship now on her way to Norway to take part in the largest NATO exercise since the Cold War. Her commanding officer said his crew had managed to bring the ship from 30 days' notice to immediate readiness in just 1 week. She was put on standby a week ago after HMS Queen Elizabeth was forced to cancel her deployment because of a propeller issue. For the very latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Do you remember those army adverts? They ran for years. Ba-boom, be the best. And it showed young men and women doing adventurous, strenuous and even, slightly dangerous things. And it made the army look like it was a really exciting and elite place to join. You had to be the best to be in the British Army. Well, a couple of weeks ago, I saw a recent army advertisement. Here it is.
اجعلني مقيم صلاتي ومن ذرياتي ربنا تقبل الله ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
I couldn't believe it. Far from being the best, this is belonging. And in the middle of a war zone. A soldier stops and prays to Allah. But hey, that's what it's all about. It's not about being the best anymore. No, it's about meeting diversity, inclusion targets. And over this weekend, we learnt extraordinarily that this now extends to a recruitment drive to recruit more people born overseas without proper security checks so that we can boost diversity numbers in the British Army. Worse still, the suggestion is that the Christianity should be taken out of annual Remembrance Day services. It all beggars belief. And thank goodness a host of former senior military figures have written what I think is a pretty explosive open letter. I'll quote a couple of paragraphs to you. Nothing could be better calculated to destroy the esprit de corps of our armed forces than this poisonous farrago of nonsense, or to deter from serving the Crown precisely the type of people most motivated and apt to our high calling. Ours is a tolerant country, and this obsessive racialising of everything is both disgusting and reprehensible. And they go on, and this is a plea to Grant Shapps. We call on you as Secretary of State for Defence immediately to cleanse our military culture of these poisonous ideas and to order a complete reset back to our core values of patriotism and unity that for generations made our armed forces the envy of the world. Strong words. How and why is this all happening? Well, it is quite extraordinary. Shapps himself has come out overnight and said a woke, an extremist culture has infiltrated the army and I'm going to launch a review. That's right, the same Grant Shapps who this time last month was saying there's not enough diversity in the army. And what I've learned, what I find hard to believe, is we have outsourced army recruitment to Capita, one of those classic kind of Blairite companies. And actually on their website, they say that they are transforming army recruitment. Well, you bet your life they are transforming army recruitment. It's no longer about being the best. It's no longer a meritocracy. It's now about quotas. It is a woke army. I ask you at home, is the army being ruined? Give me your thoughts, Farage at gbnews.com, because I have to say, not only have we seen massive cuts in numbers, not only do we have our American friends warning us that it's actually quite difficult now to go on taking us seriously, but now we have a recruitment problem. And you might remember, regular viewers, that last week on this show, you know, we had a senior former Falklands veteran saying he wouldn't join the British Army today. I'm joined by Mark Francois, Member of Parliament, of course, for Essex, former Armed Forces Minister, but most important of all, a former soldier. And I'm also joined, well, I have to say, Stephen, welcome. Your work on the Telegraph in this today has uncovered, Stephen Edgerton, sorry, has uncovered, I couldn't believe it when I read it, that there are 93 separate diversity groups within the Ministry of Defence. I read this in the Telegraph this morning. I couldn't believe it.
That includes 7 groups for LGBT personnel and civil servants, 10 groups for gender, and 14 groups for race. This is the most diversity networks in any department across Whitehall. It has more diversity networks just for disability than for the Home Office and for the Ministry of Justice. If this is not an example of the MOD becoming a woke bureaucracy, I don't know what is.
You've been studying for weeks and months the drift of not just the army, but our armed forces in general. You know, when you hear Grant Shapps today, I mean, perhaps he's had a sort of Damascene conversion. When you hear Grant Shapps today saying a woke and extremist culture has infiltrated the army, do you take him seriously?
Frankly, Nigel, I do not. These policies have all been in place in the last 14 years. All of these policies that I've been studying over the last few weeks have all been in place since, I don't know, 2022, June 2022. And who's been in charge of the armed forces since June 2022, since 2010, really? It's the Conservative Party, Conservative ministers. They have, in essence, enabled these policies, they have endorsed these policies. These aren't just hidden away somewhere. I was easily able to find them. Lots of sources sent them to me. This isn't some sort of surprise. And just to run you through it, remember, some of these policies are really serious. You talk about one, relaxing security checks for overseas recruits. And what makes that even worse is that specifically to boost diversity and inclusion in the officer and intelligence corps. Those are positions with uncontrolled access to state assets. That's a direct quote from the MOD's Race Action Plan. They've also got other policies. They allow so-called non-binary personnel, men who want to pretend they're women, to wear makeup on parades. They allow them to grow their hair out longer like women can. They're introducing gender-neutral toilets. They tell military personnel to use gender-neutral language. They tell them, in one of the examples in the policy document says, you should say, hello, my name is Sergeant Smith and my pronouns are they, them. You should be introducing them at all levels.
Francois, what is going on? I know how proud you are of your army service and how seriously you've taken, you know, as a member of Parliament, these issues. I mean, can you believe what you're hearing?
Well, I was, to be clear, I was Cold War TA in the 1980s, but certainly we didn't have any of this.
That's not the point.
We didn't have any of this in my day. Look, the Army has got three fundamental challenges at the moment. One is the whole woke agenda. Stephen has outlined that brilliantly. I won't try and compete with that. But by the way, my colleague on the Defence Committee, Richard Drax, has done a lot of work on this. Hat tip to him. The second major problem is equipment. Some of the Army's equipment is 40, 50 or even 60 years old. We've had some procurement disasters like Ajax, Morpheus, the new comm system that is years away for working. That's the second big problem. The third, as you said, is recruitment and retention. In some bits of the Army, for every person that joins, 3 are now leaving. And in some specialist areas, it's even worse than that. So the Army is bleeding out. Well, and I use those words deliberately.
They're strong words. In 2012, for some reason, Osborne, Cameron decided Capita, so this very Blairite PC organisation, would be in charge of army recruitment. They've run it since 2012. They have recently, in the Commons Defence Committee, they were described as having underperformed.
I was there. I'm on the committee.
I know. Underperformed.
Well, Capita are affectionately known to us on the committee as Crapita.
Yep.
The nickname came from Private Eye, but I see nothing to change it. So
it's not funny, really.
Well, on one level, it's not. And since they took over recruiting in 2012, it has been an unmitigated disaster. Every year bar 2, they missed the targets by thousands. So that meant each year the Army was several thousand short, and then the next year, and then the next year, and so on. So the cumulative effect...
I mean, we're at 20% for the Royal Navy, for example, for ratings. I mean, these figures are appalling.
Let's just stick with the Army for a moment, because, to be fair to Crapita, they don't do naval recruiting. But the Navy's got a real problem. On the Army, in this year, in the year 2023-24...
10% of officer recruits.
Right, 2023-24. And this all came out in the hearing. Their target was a little under 10,000 soldiers. 3/4 of the way through the year, they've recruited barely 5,000. When we pushed them on what's your best you can achieve, they said about 7,000.
But it's the culture that interests me. Let's just have a look at what they say on their website, because it's really, really interesting. Capita and the Army collectively transformed recruitment by pushing a project reset button, but the key was the cultural change in both organisations.
Nigel, aside...
I mean, what I'm going to say to you, Mark, is very simple. You know, this has been going wrong since 2012, as you quite rightly point out.
Yes, and I've pointed out many times.
Why is a Conservative government not doing something about it? And surely if we had Labour, it would almost make no difference now.
Well, I think the blunt truth is because I think a lot of very senior civil servants and some generals were heavily invested in this outsourcing, and they simply cannot bring themselves to believe that they were wrong. They are in complete denial. A sergeant major said to me once, he said, "Excuse me, sir," he says, "is it true that Capita actually worked for the Russians? Because they've done more damage to the British Army than Vladimir Putin ever has."
Well, as I say, I was looking at naval figures, etc., and the services that don't use Capita have got much better recruitment levels than Capita. It is depressing. I'd love to see the government do something about it.
Well, so would I.
Could Labour be worse? Could Labour be worse?
On recruiting, well, they'd have to go some, I mean, we should have sacked Crapiter years ago. Yep. But as I say, there are too many senior civil servants who are just too embarrassed
But Mark,
that they got it
you
wrong.
were a minister. Who is in charge of the civil servants? Who is in charge of the generals? They all have a boss, and those are Conservative ministers. And you have had every opportunity to deal with this issue. And in terms of the recruitment crisis, when we look at
when you say you, if you mean the Conservative,
the Conservative Party.
Yeah, no, we should have done this. I could drown you in Hansards full of quotes from me on the committee saying, sack these people, they're useless, or variations on a theme by Paganini. I could drown you in them, right? So, but you are right, ultimately the Conservatives have been in power. I'm not trying to pretend that we haven't been in government for 13 and a half years, but on this one point, many of us on the committee for a very long while have pleaded with ministers to get rid of Crapiter, and for the reasons I've given you, they haven't had the nerve to do it.
No, well, I'm afraid I can't see anything happening because all we've got is a review from Grant Shapps. Gentlemen, thank you. Now, as Capita have taken quite a beating from Mark Francois, we have given them the right of reply. We are actively working in partnership with the Army to support the MOD's plans for recruitment. Applications to join the British Army remain strong, and interest in joining the Army is growing due to the ongoing campaigns, including the This Is Belonging campaign. We continue to introduce improvements to the recruitment process, and we are confident that the change service we are putting in place will deliver better outcomes for candidates and for the Army.
Yes, and armadillos live in trees and eat pencils.
That's what you want to believe. That's great. I'm looking forward to getting some of your responses to this in the break. And after this, it just gets worse. You know, we've learned over the weekend some great work from Times newspapers that actually murderers and rapists who've come into Britain illegally are allowed to stay in the country because they've converted to Christianity. Surely we're all being taken for mugs.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamon, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you? And most people said, not at all. Drivers don't know what it is. They don't know what the changes are. They probably don't know what the rules are to start with. And as you've just said, doing refreshers is a really good idea. It's a bit bizarre that we're given a license to operate this quite dangerous machinery, and then we're never tested again, and especially not on the highway code, which is, especially when it changes, why wouldn't we be retested on that or have to do refresher courses on it? You know, there are conflicts on the road, there are fatalities. It makes sense to be aware of what the highway code says, because it is there to keep us safe.
Yeah, Danny Kelly, when I think back, I think it was 1999 I passed my driving test. Hardly any bikes on the road then, to be honest, probably virtually none.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
It was the news that the Alkali attacker from Clapham Common had, despite having two convictions, one for sexual assault and another slightly less serious, it was the fact that he converted to Christianity, which was the reason why on the third attempt he was granted his asylum, that has opened up a story that we've heard before, but never quite in this magnitude. And the Times newspaper has done a really very, very good job. They even found a Baptist minister in South Wales who had baptised up to 500 asylum seekers, but admitted he never saw at least 60% of them ever again. And the news that 1 in 10 of the Bibby Stockholm have converted to Christianity and are regulars at the Baptist Church. And we learn there are literally people who've committed murder and rapists who've been allowed to stay in the country because they say they've converted to Christianity. And this from people who've entered the country illegally in the first place. I find the attitude of some of our churches naive in the extreme. And I'm very pleased to be joined by the Reverend Sally Smith, project leader at Sanctus, which is an organisation that exists to help asylum seekers, and former team vicar at St Mark's Church, Stoke-on-Trent. Sally, thank you for joining us. Now, I know that you yourself have been involved in welcoming people from the Muslim faith into the Christian faith, but I thought that if somebody who was a Muslim converted to Christianity, that made them guilty of apostasy, which is thought to be a terrible crime in Islam.
Well, that's true. And I think the fact is, if we think about countries like Iran, for instance, where a lot of the people that came to my former church were from, that it was illegal to even explore other faiths. Even the churches in Iran don't allow Muslims to go to them unless they're underground churches, because the priests there will be targeted by the state for allowing non-traditional Christians into their buildings. So it is a huge lifestyle change for people to decide to discard Islam or whatever other faith they've come from, and to embrace Christianity.
Yes, I mean, it would be it is a very, very big step, and I agree with you on that point, all of which makes me more suspicious about why such large numbers of young men are doing it. I mean, you yourself, I think you've admitted that not every person you've baptised has been genuine. So is it worth us going through this process?
Well, I think we could say the same about anything, any support system that's there to help people. So, for instance, disability payments. We know that many people falsely claim PIP, but that doesn't mean we scrap all of the whole system of support for disabled people, because there are just a few people who are using that system nefariously and abusively.
No, but I mean, given that, attendance at church over the last few years has fallen very sharply, the idea that a significant number of these young men have suddenly converted to Christianity and want to go to church. I mean, look, we're being taken for a ride, aren't we? That's the point I'm making. And when you hear that people who've committed murder or rape suddenly say they've converted to Christianity, they can't go back home because they'll be persecuted. I mean, this is our system, isn't it, being taken for the most gigantic ride amidst growing public anger.
I mean, I think if you look with open eyes, if you're not narrow in your viewpoints, and you look at what's happening in Iran. I mean, a young man was sentenced to death, was actually killed the other day for supporting the movement of the young women and the young men that are supporting them to not have to wear a hijab. And I think it's really good that lots and lots of young people, this young generation, are striking out against the confines of the religions that they've been born into, and want to break out and to explore other religions, other faiths, other ways of living their lives, other ways of worshipping God, and other ways of presenting themselves in the community. In any cross-section of any community, you are going to get people who commit criminal acts. And that is something that's just about being human and living together in human community.
Sally, I
I
get that. I get that, but, you know, we learn that the Alkali attacker from Clapham Common said he'd converted to Christianity, was allowed to stay, was given his asylum on the third attempt, and yet continued to act and pray as a Muslim. I mean, that is just an outrage, isn't it?
Yeah, that shows that he was, if that's what he was doing. I mean, I don't know about that case personally, only what I've read and seen on the news.
Yeah.
And so he would be one of those small percent of people that are disingenuous in their conversion to Christianity.
All right.
But the whole thing about the Christian faith is that it isn't something that began in England for all British people. The whole story of the gospel of Jesus, which people are turning to, is built around a refugee family who fled from one country to another due to political persuasion and skullduggery and the mixture of religious leaders with politicians and all of the nefarious situations that arise out of that. That is the story of the gospel. And actually, the story of Christianity is something that transcends national identities, ethnicities. It's something that is looking forward to a new world where we can care for one another and love one another and support each other and forgive each other.
I understand that, and if I thought these young men coming forward were genuine, I might take a very different view. But thank you, Sally Smith, for sharing your experiences with us. Well, I'm joined by regular guest on the programme, Fadi Farhat, senior legal consultant at Gulbenkian and Donian Lawyers, and I mean, I don't doubt Sally Smith's sincerity. But, I mean, some of the stuff we're getting over the weekend, I mean, 500 people in South Wales, one Baptist minister, you know, who's baptised, and 60% he's never seen again. I mean, isn't this just the most massive loophole that is being abused?
Thank you, Nigel. No, Sally came across as a very kind and warm...
No, I don't doubt that, but possibly naive.
Well, possibly, but she touched on something, actually, is that sometimes it's not just about the conversion, so you don't necessarily have to have a genuine conversion to qualify for refugee status.
Sure.
It's enough that you've explored the idea of turning your back on your existing religion, so you don't actually have to go the full 9 yards to actually prove...
So what, you just sort of, I looked at a Bible once, or...
Well... That's reflective of the risk situation in the country of origin. So she cited Iran because the system over there is a theocracy, and you can't even explore the possibility of of turning your back on your existing religion, on the religion that you were born with.
It's as loose as that.
In that particular situation, yes.
Goodness gracious.
It depends on the country from which risk is emanating, and certain countries, certain theocracies. It's just as easy as that. Now, it might not be the same in Nigeria, for example, which has several religions. It has a large Christian population. It has a large Muslim population. But it depends on the countries. And yes, it could be as easy as that in certain situations.
So if a judge is presented with the so-called fact that Mr. X, despite, since he came here illegally, having behaved badly, has converted to Christianity or has examined converting to Christianity, the judge will say you're granted asylum. Is that pretty much in every case?
In a large chunk of cases, yes. Of course, you could be excluded from refugee status if you have behaved badly in certain cases. But yes, in terms of actually putting yourself within the framework...
You could be.
Yes.
But, you know, as the Times have revealed over the weekend, there's no guarantee even of that, is there?
No, of course, in Mr. Ezidi's case, he... well, yes, in that case, yes. Of course, what he then did afterwards... was after he had gained status, but
there have been others.
But that was on the third attempt. So to make 3 claims, an initial claim, a fresh claim, and a second fresh claim, so in effect 3 claims, that would have taken time, and therefore that talks about Home Office enforcement and the lack of enforcement to enforce removal in the first place for you to even get to the third attempt.
Well, I thought the situation, Fadi, was bad. But you've really enlightened me that all you have to do, folks, is just examine the possibility of converting to Christianity, and they can be grounds for you to be given asylum in this country. And is that established in law? Is it precedent? How does that work?
It's not...
Or interpretation of human rights law, I guess.
It's an interpretation of the risk factors in the country of origin.
Yeah.
So certain countries will have that risk factor where simply exploring or simply turning your back on the religion that you were born with could put you within the risk prism, as it were.
Thank you. You give us great clarity on that. I have to say what Farage just said was thoroughly depressing, but it was at least clarity. We know more now how this system works. In a moment, we'll head up to the northeast, where in exactly 30 minutes' time, Rishi Sunak will face a GB News People's Audience. We'll join our political editor, Chris Hope, after the break.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Well, we discussed the Army recruitment problems. The letter that's come from senior officers, I ask, is the Army being ruined? One viewer says, Capita were responsible for Royal Marine recruitment and are the main reason why my son gave up on returning to the Marines. Another viewer says, what a mess we have become. And very accurately, John says, the world must be laughing at us. John, Iran are laughing at us, China are laughing at us, every potential enemy is laughing at us because we're being weakened. Right, in just over 25 minutes' time, we have got this event up in the northeast of England. It'll be Rishi Sunak with the audience. It's our first big People's Panel in this general election year. And I'm crossing now live to the venue to join Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor. Chris, obviously an exciting event, and obviously we hope that other party leaders will come and do this format. From what I understand, Stephen Dixon will introduce it, then literally give the microphone to the Prime Minister, and he will then have to control the audience. So my sort of thought on this, he's going to have to command this room, isn't he?
He is. It's a challenge, Nigel. It's one which you might accept if you were running for office. How can you win over an audience? I'm going to show you around the venue. We're walking now into this cauldron of excitement with the audience here in County Durham. I'm going to go past the camera here, and here we have it. Hope you can see behind me. At this table here, we'll see Rishi Sunak shortly answering questions from viewers, from people selected by Survation, the polling company. They'll look around here, these chairs are filling up very rapidly, and it's really unmoderated question. Whatever they want to ask, they will ask him. It's no problem. We think he wants to answer questions. He talked, hasn't he, on this clip for GB News, immigration, the NHS and the rest. But really, there are two microphones here, the PM's in the middle, and ask what you like. It's an untried idea in British TV. It's the beginning of the road to the ballot box, probably in November.
Well, it's really exciting, Christopher. Thank you very much indeed. And yeah, GB News is People's Forum, GB News, the election channel, and it is actually a pretty unusual piece of TV. Normally, the questioner will ask a question, the party leader might evade it, and there'd be somebody in the middle to invigilate, saying, come on, Prime Minister, can you answer Sally's question? That's not going to happen in this case. Stephen Dixon will intervene if he absolutely has to. It's going to be up to Sunak to control that audience. And that is, I've got to tell you, not an easy undertaking, but it should make great television. But if you can't watch it, remember, you can always get GB News on DAB radio in your car or elsewhere. Now, quite an extraordinary story over the weekend, a real what the Farage moment, and this concerns the revelation about Labour's candidate in Rochdale for the by-election. Azhar Ali is his name, and he was talking to a meeting of Lancashire Labour Party members, at which he said that Israel had been warned about the 7th of October attack and had allowed it to happen. They'd allowed it to happen because they actually wanted to go into Gaza and do what they're doing. I can't imagine that if a party, a candidate for any mainstream party was to say things like this, that they'd be allowed to continue as a legitimate candidate towards the election. But Azhar Ali has been forgiven by Labour. Apparently, he read something on the internet, on a conspiracy website, and repeated it, but now sees the error of his ways. And doesn't it just go to show what a total and utter mess Labour have got themselves into? They were desperate in the beginning, with Starmer as leader, to show there was no hint of anti-Semitism left, but now they're more worried about losing the Muslim vote than anything else. They are in a complete and utter pickle over this. Now, as it's a by-election, I've got to tell you that, Ali has apologised for his comments, and he said, I apologise unreservedly to the Jewish community for my comments, which were deeply offensive, ignorant and false. Hamas's horrific terror attack was the responsibility of Hamas alone, and they are still holding hostages who must be released. So he's apologised, but what he said was extraordinary. Here are the other candidates standing in the Rochdale by-election. Azhar Ali, Labour Party. Mark Coleman, Independent. Simon Danczuk, Reform UK. Ian Donaldson, Liberal Democrat. Paul Ellison, Conservative. George Galloway, Workers' Party of Britain. Michael Howarth, Independent. William Howarth, Independent. Guy Otten, Green Party. David Ronant, Subordinate, Official, Monster, Raving Loony Party. And David Tully, Independent. Now, perhaps even more alarming, particularly for 36 school kids who returned to Totton, just outside Southampton, is when they got back outside the school and they were coming off the coach, they found two people had stowed away, two young men had stowed away, and we've got some footage of them, and you can see these guys, and they're down in the luggage compartment. Quite extraordinary. Parents were there to pick up their kids. Clearly some sense of panic that these two men had managed to get onto this coach and were there on a coach with 36 kids. So shocking, but the sort of thing that does happen, I'm afraid. But this is the extraordinary bit. The police turned up to the incident, but no arrests were made. A spokesman said they were possibly illegal immigrants. What do you mean, possibly illegal immigrants? What on earth else could they have been? We've been on to the Home Office today to try to find out what the status of these two young men is. And the Home Office have said the government works closely with law enforcement agencies to tackle illegal migration in all its forms. Our Illegal Migration Act will mean that people arriving in the UK illegally are detained and promptly removed to their country of origin or a safe third country. Yes, but what about these two? Not what will happen with the Illegal Migration Act. What about these two? The Home Office has refused to clarify. We know they weren't arrested, but has refused to clarify that they've even been detained. For all I know, they're on the run somewhere in the Southampton area. We will find out more over the course of the next few days. Now, you've seen it, haven't you, across the whole of the continent, beginning in the Netherlands, and we've seen it in Paris, and we've seen it in Germany and Poland and Italy. Farmers' protests. Well, on Friday night, Kent farmers, somewhere between 30 and 40 tractors, were in Dover, causing a degree of chaos. And is this a symptom of the Conservative Party, of a disconnect with Westminster, and maybe, according to recent polling, the Tories losing up to half their seats in rural constituencies? Well, one of those rural MPs is Jacob Rees-Mogg. He'll join me in just a moment.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that, and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I got a phone call on Friday evening. Kent farmers are protesting in Dover. They're on a go-slow through the port of Dover, causing some chaos. And you saw the footage of that just before the break. Up to 40 tractors, led by a Kent farmer, all Kent farmers. And it seems that their complaints are not dissimilar to the complaints that we've been hearing over on the continent. They feel running their own farms, particularly if they're small farmers, livestock farmers, they simply can't earn a living, that the supermarkets don't pay them a fair price, and they, of course, dominate the high street sales of all these things. And they also feel that cheap imports through trade deals are a further nail in the coffin. They're also alarmed by a government that talks about rewilding, by a government that is prepared to pay them to get out of farming. They feel all the messages are wrong. Now, I think what will happen is we'll get a bit more clarity as to what this Farmers' Manifesto is in time. But it does suggest that there's quite a big disconnect now going on between this government and rural England. And that's an astonishing thing to say, because at the last general election, of the 100 most rural seats in England, the Conservatives won 96 of them. One of them, of course, being North East Somerset, and you know who represents them, don't you? It's Jacob Rees-Mogg. Jacob, welcome. You know, traditionally, the rural areas, very conservative, bits of Lib Demery and parts of the West, sort of west from where you are and further west, bits up in Cumbria with the return Lib Dem MPs, even the Isle of Ely in the east once did, but generally very conservative. Labour not really in with a shout. And you know, you can question opinion polls, but it's remarkable now how the polling companies are all coming up with very similar figures. So they could all be wrong, but I doubt it. This suggestion, this YouGov poll suggesting that up to half of those seats could be at risk of going Labour at the election, which just seems impossible to believe. Looking at the numbers, now there is an increase in vote for reform, no question about that, they're up 9. But the real story isn't reform. The real story is a 17% rise for people saying they're prepared to vote Labour in rural England. What's happening here? Is it to do with the net zero agenda? Is it to do with rewilding? Is it to do with a feeling, and you know these people better than anybody, that somehow a sort of bunch of posh kids in London have got hold of environmental policy?
Yes. I mean, I, at the PopCon conference last week, the point I was trying to get across is that globally there is a feeling that the electors and the elected are disconnected, and a lot of this comes from the green agenda. Now, I'm strongly in favour of free trade. I think it benefits everybody. But if you have environmental regulations that make your farmers inefficient and high cost...
It's not free. It's not fair trade.
It's not fair.
Yeah.
And I'm in favour of reducing regulation to allow our farmers to compete, to move away from these schemes that don't want any food production. They just want to do sort of nice-to-do things to make the countryside
I know.
a theme park.
I've got to interrupt you. I hate doing it. We're going to Polly Middlehurst for a news flash.
Nigel, thanks very much indeed. Some extraordinary news concerning the Labour candidate for Rochdale, Azhar Ali. We're hearing now that Labour has withdrawn its support for the Rochdale by-election candidate, Azhar Ali, after his remarks that you may have heard about in the media about Israel, and that is according to a party spokesman. It is extraordinary because just a short time ago, Labour very much stood by its candidate in the Rochdale by-election despite those remarks about Israel. But it has now been made clear that Labour has withdrawn its support for Rochdale by-election candidate Azhar Ali after his criticism of remarks about Israel. That is according to a party spokesperson. Back to you, Nigel.
Polly, thank you very much indeed. Well, Jacob, I was talking about this just a few moments ago. What he said was absolutely appalling, deeply conspiratorial, but suddenly it's all OK because he read a conspiracy website and believed it, and now it's fine. So the Labour chopping and changing all over the place in a right mess. But is this the right thing they've done now?
It's the right thing they've done, but I think it now makes their 27th U-turn, and this is the mistake. Why did they back him in the first place? What he said was awful, nasty, anti-Semitic, and it's taken them several days to work out that that could not be allowed to stand.
Just extraordinary, just extraordinary. And we will not comment on what that might mean for the by-election.
No, we mustn't.
We're not allowed to.
It becomes terribly difficult.
But we will afterwards.
Yes.
Jacob, back to where you were. Yeah. So the green stuff is burdensome in terms of regulations that farmers have to comply with. They need to do a lot of this stuff now to get the subsidy.
And the nutrient neutrality. That you're hearing stories now of people buying farmland to do nothing with it, to be an offset for the nutrients that they're going to add if they're doing a building project. Now, this is completely crazy. This is taking productive land out of use simply because of a green obsession that comes from the EU, comes from the Habitats Directive, is implemented by a quango over which we have no control. So, of course, people feel there's a disconnect between
the people are following the rules and the entirely unaccountable people who are making them.
That particular EU directive, which has affected house building in this country in a very, very big way.
Yes.
But I thought we were in Brexit Britain with a government
the
that
House of Lords blocked it being removed. In last summer, the government put forward an amendment to a law.
Yeah.
They could do it under the retained EU law bill, but when the retained EU law bill was going through, a commitment was made not to reduce environmental protections. So the House of Lords block has been the problem here, and that's, again, an unelected, unaccountable body. And voters are completely fed up with this. Look at France, look at Italy, look even at Argentina. We've got to get back to being on the side of our voters, and this means moving away from this lunatic green agenda.
Yeah. Well, Jacob, I tell you what, I like the Goldsmith family. They're lovely people.
They're the most charming people.
But I think their influence over the Conservative government on this has been absolutely enormous. So the question is, can the Conservative... I mean, if Labour are up 17 points, and that... I mean, surely... I don't even know what Labour's rural policy is. Maybe Labour don't know what their rural policy is.
Well, look, this is Rehoboam Solomon, isn't it? My father scourged you with whips and I will scourge you with scorpions. That the Labour Party is fanatical on this green stuff. It will make it much worse. It will be much more hostile to the countryside. The task for the Conservatives is to make this clear in rural areas.
But I wonder, how do you get back that chunk of people who've decided they're going to switch to the Labour Party?
Well, I thought Rishi Sunak made a very good start on this last September when he made an excellent speech about rolling back some of the green enthusiasms. Claire Cortina's now done well on at least briefing that the boiler tax won't take place. We need to do more of that.
So much more.
So much more. We need to support the petrol car. People want to buy petrol cars. They don't want to buy these electric cars that don't work. That's where we need to be heading to try to make sure that we make people's lives affordable rather than making them cold and poor and not having any food.
And when it comes to farming subsidy, Jacob, we know we live with the Common Agricultural Policy for nearly half a century. We've decided we're going to do it ourselves, and the benefit of that is we're not subsidising France as well, so that's good. Have we got that right?
And that's such an important point, because opening up to free trade shouldn't harm our farmers, but it may harm continental European farmers who are the ones who really benefited from high tariffs. Have we got it right yet? No, I don't think we have, because I think we have focused too much on not using land effectively rather than using it for the production of food. And we still need to have a base food production in this country.
Yeah, it's difficult in one sense because you put a new regime in place. It's always going to have some teething problems. Is what our farmers are facing now less burdensome than the CAP?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
But we haven't got rid of so many of the EU rules yet, and we have got rid of the 3-crop rule. That's one, but we still haven't lifted the ban on neonicotinoids. Now the science about that is disputed.
So there's a heck of a lot to do.
There's a lot to do,
and maybe that helps to explain part of that disconnect that's happening with rural England,
which is much broader than just the agricultural sector. Yeah. It is across almost all demographics of people who feel that government is very remote and that they can't get things changed.
Well, they're not wrong. They're not wrong in many ways. Now, Jacob, here you are. We're both here at GB News, and we love being part of this broadcaster that is trying to break the mould of British broadcasting. Tonight's endeavour, this People's Forum that's been put in place, I'll tell you what's really interesting. It's not like a normal leaders' debate, whether it's with a group or one person. When Sally asks the question, and if the leader doesn't answer it the way Sally thinks is right, the invigilator comes in and says, now, come on. But this is literally, Stephen Dixon introduces this. He's there to intervene if he has to. This is literally, Rishi, you've got an hour with the audience. How's he going to get on?
Well, first of all, I quite like the fact that my slot's only ever taken over by party leaders. Either Richard Tice or Rishi Sunak. I'm quite flattered by that.
He's deputising.
He's deputising for my stand-in, yes. Rishi is very good in these question and answer sessions. He's actually much more fleet of foot in these circumstances than he is with the set speech when he doesn't necessarily come across as very charismatic, but in question sessions he sometimes comes alive.
But that's been with Conservative Party members generally. This is different. We've used Savation, who do a lot of the big TV shows and have done for years. They're trying to put in a room 100 undecided voters. Can he control the room?
I would have thought so. He's got an authority and charisma that come from two things. One is office. High office gives people that. And the other is he's extremely intelligent. And I think people have a respect for intelligence, and that means he can sometimes give very detailed answers to questions which politicians shouldn't shy away from. I think you should never underestimate the intelligence of the electorate.
No, very good, Jacob, thank you. Well, I tell you what, I agree with that in the sense that I think Rishi is very, very intelligent. But that on its own doesn't give leadership qualities. He's got a massive opportunity in this next hour to prove himself. Tell you what, it's going to make great telly. Don't go anywhere.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good evening to you. Alex Burkill here again with your latest GB News weather forecast. It will be a bit chilly for some of us tonight with some showery rain around, but it's tomorrow when we're going to have the wettest weather in association with a low pressure system that is currently waiting out just to the west of us. However, back to the here and now, and we do still have some blustery winds, particularly towards northern parts as we go through the night, and there'll also be some showery outbreaks of rain pushing southeastwards across some parts of the UK, though many areas staying largely dry. Some clear skies as well, and under these clear skies temperatures will take a bit of a dip, mid-single figures towards the south, a little bit colder than this further north, some places dipping below freezing, so it could be a patchy frost, even some icy patches to watch out for first thing Tuesday morning. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow morning then, a wet start across parts of the southwest, some heavy outbreaks of rain here. That rain then feeds its way northeastwards across much of England, Wales and into Northern Ireland and just into the far south of Scotland through the afternoon too. Staying dry across the north, brighter too, but chillier. Temperatures in mid-single figures, milder towards the southwest of the UK. As we go towards Wednesday, it's another unsettled picture for much of the UK. Many areas will be cloudy, outbreaks of rain, which could be a little bit heavy at times. Always the best chance of seeing some bright sunny weather will be across northern parts of Scotland, but holding on to that chilly feel there.